Deep in the ruins of the city of Chicago, a once great factory sits idle in silence. Well, except for the drive-by shootings, those aren't silent. This factory has changed hands many times over the years, but one name perseveres: S.K. So, who was S.K.? And what's up with that Wayne thing that's stamped on some of the tools? To figure out the story, we'll need to dig through all of these notes and tapes that were left behind here. The story starts with this guy, Mason Sherman. Born in 1868 in Casavonia, New York, he moved to Birmingham, Alabama in 1907, and he made a ton of money selling coke. No, not that coke. Coke is a byproduct from coal production. He was the general manager of the Alabama Byproducts Company. He left his job there and moved to Chicago, Illinois in 1916, where he met another man, Noah Klove. A graduate of Northwestern University in 1904, Klove founded the Sandow Motor Truck Company in 1912, but he sold his interest in 1916 so he could team up with Sherman and found the Sherman-Klove Company. They originally made screw machine products, bolts and nuts and hardware, and did contract production for other companies. During World War I, they were contracted by the U.S. government to supply mortar housings for the U.S. military. All this was done from their one-story plant in Chicago on Harrison Street. At some point in the 1920s, they started producing sockets under contract for other companies. A lot of these sockets were unbranded and would often just say chrome alloy and nothing else on them. They also created or purchased a subsidiary called the Brazil Stamping Division to handle their sheet metal products like toolboxes, and they sold sockets under the Brazil Tools brand. There is quite a bit of confusion on the Brazil brand. There was a Brazil can company in Brazil, Indiana, founded in 1912 by a A.E. Thiffelt. This company merged with the Chicago Sheet Manufacturing Company in 1913 and changed its name to the Brazil Stamping Company, adding a second Brazil factory in Chicago. Also, the price of coke went down that year. Something happened towards the end of 1918 where the Indiana and Chicago plants were put up for sale at a steep discount. The Indiana plant was purchased by the Vulcan Battery Company, and as far as the Chicago plant, a 1921 Chicago directory lists another guy, P.H. McCarthy, as the general manager of Brazil. McCarthy is also listed as the owner of Vulcan Stamping, so it looks like McCarthy bought both Brazil plants. References to Sherman-Klove owning Brazil start to appear in the 1930s, and it was announced that the Brazil Stamping Division was being moved into the main Sherman-Klove factory in 1937. This article also states that Brazil was handling all of their sheet metal production. I suspect, but can't prove it, that Sherman-Klove probably subcontracted out to Brazil the production of their sheet metal goods sometime in the 1920s, maybe even dating back to that World War I mortar contract. And at some point, Vulcan sold Brazil's Chicago facility to Sherman-Klove. Yeah, I spent way too much time thinking about that. In 1924, Noah Klove left the company for unknown reasons. Klove would go on to work as the assistant manager of the Lungarten Insurance Agency in Chicago. In 1927, William S. Sherman, Mason's son, joined the company, and production was moved to a new factory in Chicago's Kedzie district on 45th Street. The origin of the SK Tools brand comes out of the Great Depression, when one of their contract clients, the Hinsdale Company, went bankrupt. Sherman-Klove was stuck with their inventory, and the SK brand was formed to sell off that excess inventory. The name SK Tools and the diamond logo was first trademarked in 1933. That same year, SK's chief engineer, a man named Theodore Rueb, would invent a new type of ratchet. This may not look like anything special to us today, but back then, ratchet heads were huge, and the compact round head ratchet was a game changer. The design would be refined several times over the years, and is still being produced by SK today. As the patents expired over the years, many other manufacturers were then able to copy the design, which is why it's so ubiquitous today. Rueb would continue to create several more inventions for SK, including universal joints, a torque wrench, and his last invention, the swivel head roto ratchet. SK also, maybe inadvertently, invented the semi-deep socket. The first few sizes of their deep sockets were slightly shorter than the others. This is another design tradition that continues on today. In addition to making their own tools, SK continued to do contract manufacturing for other companies. As early as 1939, SK started making tools for Sears's Craftsman brand. These tools can be identified by a BM or a Circle K manufacturer's code stamped onto them. In 1941, SK exited the bolt and hardware business and switched to exclusively producing tools. And during World War II, SK supplied tools to the U.S. government. During this time, they limited the tools that were available to U.S. civilians. In this 1943 catalog, a lot of the items were marked suspended, as they wanted to focus their production on the war effort. In 1953, SK formed a joint venture with the Lectrolite Corporation, selling tools under the SK Lectrolite brand up until 1962. In '62, SK and Lectrolite were both bought out by Symington Wayne, an industrial conglomerate, and their tools were then rebranded as SK Wayne. This ownership only lasted until 1968, when Symington Wayne was merged with another conglomerate, Dresser Industries. However, the tools would continue to be stamped SK Wayne for a few years after the Dresser merger. Dresser would switch to a cold extrusion method for forming the sockets. Dresser claimed this method resulted in both stronger and thinner sockets due to the unbroken grain pattern in the steel. Going into the 1970s, SK would become active in the racing circuit, sponsoring and making brand deals with drivers in drag racing, IndyCar, and NASCAR. Dubbed the Great Ones, ads featuring these drivers and race teams would be prevalent in Popular Mechanics magazine. Dresser would exit the hand tool business in 1983, selling SK to Corcoran Partners, a private equity firm, for $7.8 million. Upon taking over the company, Corcoran sued Dresser for fraud, alleging Dresser had misrepresented the financial condition of the company and had overvalued obsolete inventory, such as defective compressed powdered metal ratchet pawls. Dresser countersued, claiming they had loaned Corcoran money so SK could make payroll during the transition. In a 1987 arbitration agreement, Corcoran was awarded a $1.3 million reduction in the purchase price. However, Dresser was awarded $1.4 million on their counterclaims. Corcoran then took Dresser to court, where Dresser was ordered to pay Corcoran $4 million in compensatory damages and $50 million in punitive damages, which was then reduced by $42 million. However, this judgment would be overturned on appeal in 1996. I could not find if a new lawsuit was ever filed after that, but while all this was going on, Corcoran had gone on to sell SK to Facom, a French tool company, in 1985. Facom continued to make SK tools here in the U.S., but also added some other rebranded Facom tools to the SK lineup. One example is these unusually shaped blue-handled screwdrivers. Dubbed the Ergo Twist, these were made in France. They also introduced an updated ratchet design, the Tough One, which featured a 72-tooth mechanism and a larger cross-shaped reversing lever. 1987 was the introduction of Super Chrome, a proprietary chrome plating that SK claimed could survive 192 hours of salt spray without rusting. Facom went through some financial issues in the early 2000s, closing down plants in France and Germany, eventually being bought out by Stanley Works in 2006. SK, however, was spared this fate, as in 2005, the management of SK reached an agreement with Facom to buy back the brand. Unfortunately, this did not last long. The new independent SK declared bankruptcy in 2010. There were two interested parties listed in the bankruptcy filing: Ideal Industries and a private equity firm, VO Investments. SK ended up getting bought out by Ideal Industries. Ideal is a U.S. company that makes electrical connectors. They had a little bit of a tool haul in 2010. In addition to buying SK, they also bought out Western Forge and Pratt Reed. Ideal moved SK to a brand new factory in Sycamore, Illinois, and also leveraged their Western Forge plant to supplement production. Under Ideal, things were starting to look up for SK. This is when they came out with their X-frame ratcheting wrenches, which use a 6-pawl ratchet design, their dual-tooth ratchet mechanism, which could be used to double the effective tooth count in an older ratchet, and the LP90 90-tooth low-profile ratchets. They even had a Socket of the Month club, where you would get a socket in the mail every month. However, things maybe weren't looking so good behind the scenes. Ideal shut down the Western Forge facility in 2020 after failing to renegotiate their contract with Sears Craftsman, and in 2021 Ideal sold SK to GreatStar, also known as Hangzhou Industrial. GreatStar is a pretty big company in China. They make tools for the Duratech and WorkPro brands that you see on Amazon. In addition to buying SK, they also bought a few other American brands: Miller's Falls, Jorgensen, Shopvac, Arrow, and Goldblatt. Shortly after the SK acquisition, SK would be moved into Shopvac's Williamsport, Pennsylvania plant, and the nearly new plant Ideal had built in Sycamore was closed down. GreatStar also promptly removed all country of origin markings from the tools themselves, so there is quite a bit of confusion and speculation online as to which SK tools are still being made here in the U.S. and which ones are imported. To attempt to clear some of this up, I just emailed them, and surprisingly they responded back the same day. It turns out there is still a handful of SK products that are made here in the U.S. The ratchets are a combination of U.S. and global materials. The LP90 ratchet is still U.S. made. The hook and pick set, those are made by Ullman. The turbo sockets are from AJ Manufacturing, and the USA-made pliers are made for them by Wildy. So yeah, some stuff is still being made here, but a lot of the production appears to be contracted out to other companies. Those sockets available on Amazon that have that green stripe on them, that indicates that they're from China and are likely rebranded Duratechs. The new imported SK tools briefly made an appearance at Lowe's in 2023, but after a big Black Friday deal push, the products were moved to the clearance sections in the stores and are no longer offered for sale on Lowe's website. In 2024, SK launched a modular stackable toolbox system to compete with Milwaukee and Klein, so GreatStar does appear to be making some attempts at revitalizing the brand. I guess that's the end of the SK story for now. Well, not quite. There is still one more piece to the SK story, but to tell it, we're going to have to fast travel to a different location. This is Berland's House of Tools in Palatine, Illinois. In 1960, Dave Sherman, Mason Sherman's grandson, left SK to start his own business. And in 1969, he purchased Berland's, a hardware store in Chicago. Today, there are 3 Berland's locations, this one here in Palatine, one in Joliet, and one in Lombard, Illinois. Berland's is currently run by Dwight Sherman, Mason's great-grandson. So even though SK may be owned by Communist China now, there is still a part of the SK legacy living on here in America. And that is the complete 2025 Specialized Edition of the full story of SK Tools. And yes, I'm aware I didn't mention the Frankenstein ratchet. I plan to do a full standalone episode on that sometime in the future. As usual, links to all my sources are in the video description, and please leave a comment if you have any missing pieces to add to the story. Be sure you're subscribed for the next Tool Lore episode, and check out the channel memberships if you want to gain early access to the videos. Thanks everyone for watching. See you later. Bye. Super cool!